Family, family. Let me make sure y'all can hear me. Make sure we good. Talk back to me. Somebody post in the chat. Pecan, post in the chat. Let me know if you can hear me. Sam is in here. All right, we good. We good. We good. Welcome back to the dungeon. Welcome back to the dungeon. It's been a minute. Listen, it's been a minute. Life been lifing. How they say that? You see the gear though. Sam, you see the gear. You see the gear. We back. We ain't been in the NFL in 20 years. We back now though. We back. We back. We back. Listen, if you're an Eagles fan, if you know an Eagles fan, share this with them because they're grieving right now. They're grieving right now. I know a few of them that's gonna jump on Facebook, but they're grieving right now. Share it with them because this gonna help them out a lot. Listen, we back. I got to give a shout out to my brother Sam. Sam did a good job with the intro. You're gonna hear that in a few seconds. Upgrading, and I'm a little nervous because we've got a lot of new things, a lot of new features that we have, and you know how technology is. Some things may mess up. See, my brother Jamil Middleton. If you don't know this guy, he's live on Facebook every Saturday around 10 a.m. Always shedding some knowledge, especially from the scriptures. Doing a great job of doing that. He talked about the truth and the lie this past Saturday, and he did a great job with that. I'm always blessed to hear him. I'm honored that he's in the dungeon with us today. Listen, shout out to my brother-in-law, Adrian Wiggins. Adrian Wiggins, you can find him on Facebook. He did the backdrop. He did the wall. It's called Divine Contracting. Yeah, so he did the wall. So if you need anything done, you're in South Carolina, he travels. He'll get that done for you. And so just wanted to shout those people out because it's lunchtime and I know plenty of y'all are at work. Put your headphones on, turn your phone over. Don't lose your job over what we're about to talk about. If you're at home, heat you up some ramen or we used to call it oodles and noodles. Heat you up a hot pocket because we're going to be talking about a heavy topic, a heavy subject today. We're not going to be able to really dig into it very deeply, but we're going to be talking about grief in the holidays. And so many people don't understand what they're dealing with. Grief is a very real thing, and it's something that has caused a lot of people to be fearful, a lot of people to not enjoy the holidays. And it's a thing that we want to tackle here. And one thing we do on the Practical Purpose podcast is we try to give you practical living principles. And then we go and find those things in the Bible to help you out because the Bible is going to stand. Doesn't matter what any doctor says, anybody else say, what the scripture say is going to stand. This is my brother, Brian, man. Take that dead skin stuff off. Come on, man. Listen, he's a Cowboy fan, so I don't even know why he posted something in here. You know, I don't know why he posted something in here today. Miss Carter, I see Miss Carter. I see a lot of y'all. We're going to dig in to grief here in a second. And what I want to try to do is give you some ways practically and spiritually that you can deal with it. We'll be back in 1 minute. How excellent are you? How excellent are you on your level? Like you spend so much time talking about other people at your job. How excellent are you on your level? Are people benefiting from your excellence?
Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. We living life with a practical purpose, making every day worth it. Live from the dungeon, we go deeper than the surface, leading with wisdom from the streets to the churches. Searching, what seeking you find? We speaking right to your mind. The sun ain't fighting to shine, no diamonds either. Light hit the Jews and turn fools to believers. Steady making moves and teaching truth to the leaders. Use all these tools just so you can supersede us as real. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Said 1 2. Said 1 2. Yeah. Yeah.
Listen, Miss Smith says she gonna stay focused. She's a Steelers fan. It's okay. It's okay. I have nothing to get. As long as you're not a Cowboy fan or Eagle fan, um, you good in my book. You good in my book. All right, so let's talk about grief. We're talking about grief during the holidays. Grief during the holidays. What is grief? What is grief? Grief is an intense sorrow and emotional pain that people experience after losing someone or something important to them. So for the purpose of this show, we're going to talk primarily about losing someone, but until I started studying this, I didn't realize that you can grieve over losing something. And even in the text that we're going to look at later on, the children of Israel are grieving over a land that they're no longer in, right? So you can grieve not only over someone, you can grieve over something. I remember when I stopped coaching basketball. I was a basketball coach and I loved and enjoyed coaching basketball. And when I made a career change, I was excited about the change that I made. But there was a deep sadness that I had when basketball season rolled around and I couldn't quite figure it out. It was because primarily what coaching basketball did for me was something that I loved and I lost it. And I grieved over that. And I didn't realize that that's what was going on. I was grieving over something that I lost, not necessarily a person. And so I want you to keep in mind that people are not in this season, are not just grieving over people that they've lost, they're also grieving over places and over things. Listen, grieving is a personal process. There's no right way to grieve. And I know a lot of people who watch the Practical Purpose podcast are church folk. And church folk, we have a problem with dealing with grief. We don't know how to deal with grief. And it's because we're not being taught in church how to deal with these things in a practical way. Church folk will be quick to tell you should be over that by now. Not understanding that there's no time limit when it comes to grief. It takes as long as it takes. Right. You've got to be sensitive with how you're dealing with people. And sometimes you can be so spiritual that you're not any good to anyone practically on the earth. Listen, don't be so critical of how people handle the holidays. My sister, don't be so critical. Sometimes people not gonna want to come around. They don't want to hear Chris Brown or Donny Hathaway. They don't care anything about Mariah Carey and hearing those Christmas songs. In their mind, this is a season of grief for them. Sometimes it's a season of anxiety and depression because someone who was once at the table is no longer there. So you gotta understand that the way you respond to people in their grief is critical to their success. It's critical to how they handle their grief. It is okay to not feel like celebrating the holidays. It's okay to not feel like it. Right there, and when I talk about the holidays, I'm primarily starting with Thanksgiving because that's a family holiday, right? Then you have Christmas, and then you have New Year's. And all the time on New Year's, you hear how things are going to be new and this and that, but you still got that feeling inside of you, that grief that's there that makes it seem like nothing will ever be new again, right? You've got to be careful how you deal with people that are grieving during this season. A couple years ago, we did a podcast, and you can go back. I'm gonna link it in the bottom. It was called "The Blessing and the Burden of Christmas." Right, and there is a blessing and a burden that comes along with these holidays. Right, the blessing is family oriented. You get a chance to spend time with family. You get a chance to see family members that you may not have seen for a while. You get a chance to laugh and love and eat, and all of those things are important. But the burden is that there's a missing seat at the table for many of us. I know in my family, We big on we eat good during the holidays, and there are certain foods that my aunt would bring that ain't gonna be there no more. Ain't gonna be no more oxtails. Ain't gonna be no more sliders, right? Because how dare somebody else try to do what she did? Right, that's the burden that comes along with Christmas, is that you're able to share these things with people, but there's somebody that's no longer there. And when you put that in the spiritual sense, when you talk about Christmas, the blessing is that Christ came, right? Christ came from his eternal seat. He came, but the burden is that he came to die for us. Right. So there's a blessing and a burden. And that's kind of what my brother Jamil talked about on Saturday, is the truth and the lie. You've got to understand that there's a blessing and a burden that comes along with this season. Miriam Gant says, and critical to how they handle you. Don't get offended. Absolutely. We're going to get into that. We're going to get into that because people sometimes don't know how to deal with grief. Many of us don't know how to deal with it. And so grief changes who you are internally. And if it changes who you are, it also changes how you deal with other people. And sometimes we're not careful enough to understand. I see my frat brother Shaq, my guy. We was over there last week at Spring Valley, man. I saw you in the gym. Yes, sir. Sam says no more oxtails. My aunt ain't here. Ain't nobody else gonna make them. And so, yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow, Christmas Eve, with my family, because we always do it on Christmas Eve. But I'm also a little weary because it's a missing seat at the table, right? My brother, it's a missing seat at the table. Listen, you can be thankful for what remains and still be sad for what was lost. Let me say that again. You can be thankful for what remains and still be sad for what is lost. Listen, I know so many times in church circles, we put so much emphasis on joy and being happy and all of those things, and those things are good. But then we cause people to lose faith and lose trust because we don't share with them that you can be happy and still have sad moments at the same time. You can have joy in your life and still be dealing with pain. You can be thankful to God for what you have, but also be sad about what you don't have anymore. We don't talk about the balance anymore spiritually. We don't talk about that. And because of that, people are shouting Sunday, jumping over pews, speaking in tongues, all out of order on Sunday. And then on Monday and Tuesday, they're struggling because they don't know and they're not being taught, how do I deal with these things? Listen, grief and love are conjoined. You can't have one without the other. Anything that you love, when you eventually lose it, you're going to experience grief. And so we've got to do a better job, my sister, of talking about the balance, right? The balance. There's always balance. Life is about balance. That's what Solomon talks about in Ecclesiastes. Life is about balance. It's a time for this and it's a time for that, right? It's about balance. And when we miss the balance of life, when we miss those things, grief becomes astronomically hard to deal with. It's the balance. All right, my brother Shaq says, this is important for men to know, especially black men. Why? Primarily because men are taught to suppress their feelings. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. And if you are one that suppresses your feelings, right, which is me, which is probably most men out there, we're taught to suppress. Don't worry about it. Don't let people know what you're dealing with, what you're facing. What happens is, and I'm gonna say this a little later, but I'll go on and say it since Shaq jumped on it. Whatever you suppress causes suffocation. When you suppress grief, you suffocate yourself. And when you suffocate yourself, you're not able to be 100% for the people that you love. And as a man, your responsibility is for your family first. I know there's some ministers on here that have roles in the church and things of that nature, but your primary responsibility is for your family. If you're putting your church before your family, that's a problem. That's a problem. Even Jesus, when he was dying on the cross, he turns to Mary and John, and he says to Mary, "Behold your son." Talking about John. He was concerned about his family. So as men, we have to be careful not to suppress our feelings. And I'm gonna talk about what we can do, but we have to be careful not to suppress our feelings so that we are who we are supposed to be for other people. We are in condition, Shaq says, to hide feelings and be a Superman. Listen, that's it. We want to be superheroes because that's what we've been conditioned to believe we are, right? If we're struggling with anything in my family, I don't always tell my wife how things are going in certain areas. Why? Because I want her to not worry about it. I want her to know that no matter what happened, he gonna make sure we taken care of, right? And so we suppress what we're feeling, and it causes us to not be who we genuinely are for other people. That burden gets heavier without balance. Right, right, right. And oftentimes it's not what you're carrying, it's how long you having to carry it. And when you're having to carry something for so long, you could take a 25-pound weight that's easy for you to work with. But if you're holding it for 2 hours, it's gonna become heavy. And it's going to continue to become heavy. And that's why you need other people in your life. We're going to get there. Y'all jumping ahead of me. This is good. Y'all jumping ahead of me. Listen, after a loss, the holiday season is going to be a blend of hurt and joy. That's H. Norman Wright. H. Norman Wright says, after a loss, the holiday season is going to be a blend of hurt and joy. Again, that's that balance. That's that balance. You have to understand how to find that balance and how to work within that balance, right? How to work. And I know we don't like that term, especially as believers. We don't like that term balance because it comes from you hear it a lot in Buddhism and Confucianism and all of those things. However, Solomon teaches, the wisest man that ever lived, teaches us about balance. Right? I don't have that in my notes, but in Ecclesiastes, I think chapter 3, he teaches us about balance. And when you're in a state of grief, one of the hardest things there is to do is to find that balance. Right? It's to find that balance. One thing that we do when we're grieving a lot of times is we isolate ourselves. Right? Brian says you're either a superhero or you're soft, unfortunately. Right. Right. Dare not cry. You better not cry if you're grieving. Right. But when you start talking about that grief and males dealing with that grief, we get a bad rep. And we really don't know how to deal with it. We just really don't know. Right. Because if you're a believer, you better not go see a professional. Right? Because Jesus gonna fix it all. And if you're not a believer and you just a man, you just soft. Right? So we gotta understand how to find balance. Isolation can be good if the focus is on something positive. Even Jesus isolated himself from time to time. But when you're focused on something negative, isolation is a trap. If you ever watch the Discovery Channel and you watch some of these animal shows that sometimes I'll just sit and watch from time to time, don't even have the volume on or nothing, just watching how they move, you'll notice that lions seek antelope, seek giraffes, seek zebras who are in isolation. Because when you're isolated, your guard is down. When you're isolated, you don't have any support systems. So I do believe that God wants us isolated for seasons so that he can teach us things. But oftentimes, if you're not focused on the positive things, if you're not focused on the right things, I should say, when you get in isolation, you'll find yourself in a trap. PK Tan says safety in wise counsel. Come on to therapy. Right. You need it. You need people in your life who are going to help you. And I know I'm gonna get in trouble. I know I'm gonna get in trouble. But we have this saying in Christian circles, especially, that as long as I got Jesus, I don't need nobody else. Right. And I believe as long as you got Jesus, you're gonna be all right. But I believe he puts people in our lives to help us. Every time he answered his people throughout the course of the Bible, he answered his people with a person. He always uses people to help us. Now, there are seasons where you got to handle stuff on your own. There are seasons where he needs you to be totally dependent. You should always be totally dependent on him, but he's always placing people in our lives as answers. So don't get so righteous where you feel like I don't need to talk to nobody. That didn't happen. Even God made Adam and he looked down and said, listen, it's not good for him to be alone. Now, it's the same God that was walking and talking with him. Listen, Miss Carter says women operate the same way. We have to be strong to keep the family going. Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's that motherly spirit that women have, that nurturing, where they're going to take care of others before they take care of themselves. Let me say that again. They're going to take care of others before they take care of themselves, even if it causes them to go without. And men feel the same way. Men feel the same way. So let's talk about 6 practical things before we go to the spiritual side. 6 practical things that we need to understand when we're dealing with grief in the holidays. 6 practical things. And the first one is one that on this show we always say. Number 1, acknowledge the grief. Listen, you will never grow or improve in an area you won't acknowledge. Let me say that again. You will never grow or improve in an area you are unwilling to acknowledge. You've got to acknowledge that there's grief there, that I'm struggling with the loss of this person or this thing. I'm struggling to make it during this season. I'm in a mode, I'm in struggle mode. Well, what we used to say back in the day, I'm on the struggle bus right now. You've got to acknowledge it. And one thing we always talk about here on this show is acknowledging it. You've got to acknowledge. You cannot grow or improve if you're not acknowledging where you're struggling at. And the problem with most believers, and I'm trying to stay on the practical side, but it's hard right now. The problem with most believers is we refuse to acknowledge where we're struggling at. And that's because we've been taught that the actual struggle is sinful. Because you're not walking in joy, you're walking in sin. No, I might be in grief right now. That's not necessarily sinful. I'm not wrong for grieving. And so you have to acknowledge that grief. You've got to know that this is what I'm dealing with. And sometimes it's hard to decipher what you're dealing with. And that's why you need to talk to some people sometimes. Right? We're going to get there. So the first thing practically is when you're dealing with grief, you've got to acknowledge that that's what you're dealing with. And everybody handles it differently. Everybody handles it differently. Listen, number 2 is you have to set boundaries. You may not be able to do during this holiday season what everyone else does. Listen, you may not be able to stay over at the house with the family for 2 hours. You might can only do an hour, 45 minutes. Listen, you've got to set some boundaries. I was talking to I'm not gonna say her name because I know she's on here. I was talking to her and she was dealing with the loss of her husband. And I sent her a text just to see how she was doing. And she said, I got to go through this part by myself. And I understood that. And when you understand exactly what you're dealing with, remember that isolation is not negative. It's not bad if you're focused on the right things during that isolation, right? You got to set boundaries. You've got to set boundaries during this season. all the time, but especially during this season. Set some boundaries. Know what you're capable of. Know what's going to put you in a good place and what can possibly put you in a bad place. And you operate right in the balance of that, right? That word balance keeps coming up and it's nowhere in my notes at all. Listen, number 3. So number 1 is acknowledge the grief. Number 2, set boundaries. Number 3, get support. Listen, get support. There are 3 entities that I think you need support from. And you may not need them all at the same time. But friends, people who really love you and really care for you, they really care about you. Get support from those people. Listen, and you've got to know and understand what you can tell a friend and what you shouldn't tell a friend. You can't tell everybody everything. So don't be naive as to think that you need to tell your friend every single detail of what you're going through. No. But you need to have some friends in your circle that you can talk to about the grief, about the pain, about the depression, about the anxiety, about whatever it is that you're facing during this season, because you don't know, number 1, how they can help you. And you don't know, number 2, if they can be going through the same thing. Right? Second group of people, second entity that I think you need to talk to or be in close proximity of in a lot of cases is family. Family. Now, it's not every family member. And I'm not saying you need to talk to every family, but everybody got one cousin that they can call, that they can talk to. PK and Tam makes a good point. Exercise discretion. Listen, you better know who you can talk to and who you can't talk to. That's family and that's your friends. Understanding who it is that can help you in this particular season. And sometimes you don't know who it is. Sometimes you have to pray and ask for guidance on who to talk to. Right? The third entity that I think you need to talk to is professionals. I'm gonna say that again. You need to go lay on somebody's couch sometimes. Sometimes you need to go sit up in somebody's office who know how to get some stuff out of you, who know how to help you have a conversation that you wouldn't have with anyone else. That know how to pull some stuff out of you to help you see maybe it's the error of your ways. Maybe it's a perspective that you need to look at a little bit differently. Coltrane. Discernment. You got to talk to some professionals. And I know in Christian circles, we run away from that. You go talk to the pastor, you go talk to the elders at the church. And I'm not saying you shouldn't talk to them people, but they ain't got the training sometimes that a professional has to be able to help you. Everyone needs therapy. Everyone needs therapy. Go talk to somebody who's trained to help you in that area. And you know what? The more I converse with counselors all the time. My sister is a counselor. One of my friends who I used to work with, she's a counselor. And they'll tell you grief is something that's nobody has it all. Nobody has such a great deep revelation or understanding of grief, because it's all encompassing and it's different for every person. Go talk to a professional. Listen, how strong is your circle? How strong is your circle? There are some people that you got in your circle that if you're only depositing into them and they're never depositing into you, they probably shouldn't be there. They're there because they've been your friends since high school, but they can't go where you're going. So you've got to make sure you've got the right circle and the right people that can help you. Miriam Gant says this, and there are Christian counselors if you feel most absolutely. Absolutely. And they are trained not only in how to counsel, but they're also trained in the same belief system that you have. Right? That's good. That's good. Grief is messy. Oh, y'all in the chat. Y'all live now. Cause it hits, Coltrane says it hits at the random times. Check on your strong friends. Absolutely. Right? Absolutely. And the holiday season is just it's an obvious time for many people. But it's a difficult time, but it hits at random times. It may not be any type of holiday going on. It may not be anything special. You might just be riding in the car and pull up. I know sometimes if I'm on Broad River and I ride past the gas station, I used to see my aunt at all the time. I don't even want to go to that gas station no more. But it hits at random times, right? I have her car outside. Every time I look at it, there are things that hit every time, or it hits at random times, and you don't even know what hit you. All right, you've got to learn how to embrace that, how to understand what that is, and how to live in that balance. Right. So I said acknowledge the grief, set boundaries. I'm trying to move faster. Get support. Here's the fourth thing: create new traditions. Create new traditions. And the reason why you want to create new traditions is because new traditions just brings about a sense of newness. I know last year for Thanksgiving, my cousins had a big Thanksgiving and we all went there. That was the first time we've ever done that. Right? We all went there instead of having it, at my mom's house. Right? That was a new tradition. But here's the key thing: new traditions are not meant to help you forget lost loved ones. Let me say that again. New traditions are not meant to help you forget lost loved ones. They should actually help you memorialize them. Don't ever think that you're going to forget what you are grieving over or who you are grieving over. You don't want to forget. In fact, the Bible talks about how powerful our memory is. And oftentimes, God allows us to keep things in remembrance to help us remember not only who we are, but who He is. Right? Right? He can bring you through all of those things. Right? He can help you get through all of those things. Number 5 is laugh. I read a quote that says, "Sometimes you laugh because you have no more room for crying." Right? Laugh. Fine. Listen, I got some cousins that it don't matter what's going on. They gonna make you gonna laugh when you around them, and it's just who they are. They're not trying to make you laugh. They're not stand-up comedians. It's just being around them creates a different feeling for you, even if you're grieving, even if you're in depression, even if you have anxiety. We could be at a homegoing service and they gonna say something or do something that make you laugh. My wife got some cousins that's like that. Trapper. We be walking into the homegoing service and something he says or does just gonna make you laugh. Laughing is critical. Ash, oh Ash, gotta make room for the giggles. Yeah, laughing is powerful in the healing process. Laughing is powerful, and for me, it's got to be natural. If you're trying to make me laugh, no, it's just being around certain people who have that energy about them that they're going to make you feel better, no matter what situation you're in. All right, and the sixth thing that I want to talk about as far as dealing with grief during the holidays practically is to have realistic expectations, and maybe this should have been number 2 after acknowledging the grief. But have realistic expectation. Be real with yourself and be real with others. And you can't worry about what people are going to think about you when you set those boundaries. Listen, I'm here, y'all. I'm gonna be here about an hour. That's all I got. That's all that's in me. There's some people I can't talk to over the holidays, right? I'm setting some boundaries, right? And I'm realistic about my expectations. I'm realistic about what I'm going through. Listen, if you know someone who is grieving, listen to those who are grieving. Listen to them. Don't try to cheer them up. Just listen to them. Just be that voice of reason. Just be that listening ear for them. right? Because them even expressing thoughts and talking to you is a form of them mourning. Mourning is the outward expression of grief, right? And the scripture says those who mourn will be comforted, right? Well, people don't know to comfort you if you don't mourn. And mourning looks different for everybody. But listen to them. Listen and be that support system for those who grieve. So the six things that we talked about practically when you're dealing with grief during the holidays. Number one, acknowledge the grief. Number two, set boundaries. Number three, get support. Number four, create new traditions. Number five, laugh. And number six, have realistic expectations. Listen, and you've got to remember that it's a personal process. And there's no right way. There's no order. There's no time limit. You may be grieving for 40 years. It's no time limit. All right. So here on the Practical Purpose Podcast, y'all know it's almost time. We like to hit the practical side of it, but we also have to hit the spiritual side. And that's because I just believe personally that I can tell and teach you these things, but if I don't give you some foundation that's going to always stand, then you may struggle to get through those things. Listen, you've got to always have a foundation that's sure. And so what I like to do is try to find the subject somewhere in the Bible and extrapolate a few points from that kind of match what we talked about practically. Right? And so in the book of Psalms, and I'm almost done, chapter 137 verses 1 through 4, it's a story of the children of Israel who are lamenting not being in Zion, not being in Jerusalem. They're grieving, right? And it's in the book of Psalms. We're going to look at it. Psalms 137. Listen, if your pastor gets up and they say the 137th division of Psalms, they need to go back and read. Ain't nothing but 5 divisions of Psalms. It's chapter 137. All right. Ms. Smith says if you can't support them in the way they need it, leave them. Absolutely. Leave them alone. It ain't meant for you. Everything and everybody ain't your ministry. All right. Absolutely. All right, so the children of Israel here are they're in Babylonian captivity, and what happens is they're grieving their homeland. They're grieving where they come from. All right, and that first point is this what we said earlier. You can grieve over people, but you can also grieve over things. And so they're grieving where they're from. Let's read it together. Here it is. Psalms 137, 1 through 4. By the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there, we hung up our harps, for there our captors required of us songs, and our tormentors laughed at us, saying, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? So they're grieving over their predicament. They miss Jerusalem, they miss their land, and they're grieving. And from these 4 verses, there are 3 key components in the next 5 minutes that I want to bring out. Here's the first thing it says. It says, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. Number one is it's okay to remember. It's okay to remember whatever it is you're grieving over. It is okay. You know, especially when you're dealing with people, God puts people in our lives for reasons. And when they're gone from our life, there is a void that is there. You know, some things are not replaceable. You know, you hear the story of Job all the time, and the pastor gets up and talks about Job and everything Job went through. Then at the end, he says, God will give you double. God gave Job double for everything he went through. And everybody started running and shouting because the pastor said, you gonna get double. But here's the thing, some things are irreplaceable. So Job got another wife, and Job got more children, but he didn't get that wife or those children back. Some things are irreplaceable. Some people are irreplaceable. And even though you find someone to fill that title, because people are personable, because we have souls, what happens is you never can replace the experiences you had with that person. And so it's okay to remember. We are not expected to forget meaningful relationships and people in our lives. You're not expected to forget them. You're never going to forget some meaningful people in your life. And some people will never fill that role. Listen, remembrance can bring pain. Here go the balance and joy. Embrace both of them. Remembrance can bring pain and joy. Embrace both of them. So it says that they remembered Zion, right? It's okay to remember. Here's point number 2. It says that they wept. It says, by the waters of Babylon, there we sat down and wept when we remember. Listen, it's okay to express your feelings. They wept. That is what we talked about when we talked about mourning. Mourning is the outward expression of grief. It's the outward expression. It's okay to mourn. Everybody mourns differently. But they sat and they wept when they remembered their old land, right? Mourning is how we express that. And that looks different. I remember this time last year, my wife lost two uncles and her grandmother within the span of about a month and a half, right? And right before Christmas, her grandmother died. And one thing that she did, I roll over, it's 3:00 in the morning. She ain't there. I go look for her. She in the garage painted the whole garage, 2 coats. That was her way of expressing that grief, that mourning. We all do different things. I remember my dad saying one time that he would just go to homegoing services to support people once his son died. That way of expressing that grief, that mourning looks different for everybody, but it is okay to express your feelings. Listen, don't suppress how you feel. Suppressed grief suffocates. We said that earlier. Don't suppress how you feel. And we talked about earlier how, especially for men, but suppressed grief suffocates. You got to express it. You got to express it. Even Jesus said, blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. The implication there is, although you're grieving, the mourning is the expression of that grief. In order for you to be blessed, you've got to express the grief. In order for you to be comforted, you've got to express it. So whatever you're struggling with, as far as grief is concerned, express it. However you do that, you express it so that you can be comforted. Listen, so point number 1 was it's okay to remember. Point number 2 is it's okay to express your feelings. But look at verse 4. Verse 4 says, how shall we sing the Lord's song in a strange land? And that's critical, because they had so much reverence for what they were grieving over that they refused to sing or to celebrate or to be joyful in any other place. Now, here's the problem. I believe it's God's best in our life, for no matter what situation and circumstance we find ourselves in, that we find a way to acknowledge Him. And in acknowledging Him, we express how we feel about Him, that joy, even in negative situations. Right. And when you go to church, they'll tell you all the time, oh, praise God in any situation. That ain't as easy as it is to say it. You know, when David said, I would bless the Lord at all times, he legit meant all times. But it wasn't easy to do that. Don't allow the current situation and feelings to steal the joy of this season. Listen, don't let it steal the joy. You can have both now. You can be sad for what's lost and thankful for what remains at the same time. Pecan Tan says emotions Emotions just want to be acknowledged. If you keep suppressing it, it will eventually come out, sometimes in the most inopportune moments. Absolutely. Absolutely. Listen, you can sing, and by sing I mean express, because everybody can't sing. Everybody can't. I'm not literally talking about singing, but you can express yourself even in grief when your perspective changes. When your perspective, because you can always find the silver lining in everything. You know, my aunt passed, what, that's about a year and a half ago now, and I still struggle with. I still got the obituary next to my bed. You know, but one thing that is a silver lining is in it for me is, you never supposed to read people diaries, but some of the things that she was going through as far as her loneliness, she's no longer going through. She had lost her husband, she had lost her mom, her grandma, she had lost so many people, and she was very lonely. And I only knew that from reading some of the things that she wrote, and that helps me get through to know that she's no longer feeling those things. That's not an easy thing to do, right? I'm not saying it's going to be easy, but in every situation, you can be thankful and still be sad for what you lost. See, you don't get that part in church. In church, you get be thankful in all things, and that's what Paul says. But watch this. Paul said that from a prison cell. He said it from a prison cell. So he understood the fact that, hey, I'm supposed to be thankful, but I would much rather be somewhere else too. There's a balance to everything. There's a balance. Listen, the last point there, about it is in John 16:20. It says, "Verily, verily, I tell you, you will weep and mourn while the world rejoices. You will grieve, but your grief will turn to joy." Listen, that's critical. And in that text, he's specifically talking about the fact that he's going to leave, and you're going to grieve that he left. But when he returns, you're going to find joy. Now, that was back then, and he still ain't came back. So the process of grieving can be very long. The process of grieving, we're gonna get out of it, can be extremely long, right? We don't have a time limit on the process of grieving. But what we do know is that eventually, at some point, whether on this side or another side, at some point, we're going to reach a state of being joyful, even in the grief. Right. So here's your closure. Here's your homework. PK and Tan put you always want homework. So here's your homework. A few questions. Number one, are you grieving during this holiday season? Are you grieving a person? Are you grieving a place? Are you grieving a thing? Do you recognize that it's grief? Right? Because it could be something else. Do you recognize that you are grieving? Right? Do you recognize the fact that you need to get some people involved with you to help you get through that process? Make a point. Here's your homework. I want you to make a point this season to acknowledge, remember, and seek joy in the middle of that grief. Find the balance in the middle of that grief. Right? No matter what it takes. It may take you taking some time off work. It may take you going some places. It may take you getting from out of your normal mundane life. Like, you may have to do something different every now and then. You may have to express yourself in a different way, right? But I want you to acknowledge it, remember, and seek joy in the middle of your grief. Listen, that's your homework. That's not easy. It's going to be difficult to do that, but you can do that. Be on the lookout for people who are grieving. Be on the lookout for different people when you go eat this week. Be on the lookout for people who may be grieving. Look at that thing right there. One. No, she bad. That's my wife, y'all. Be on the lookout for people who may be grieving and they need some support. And listen, Miss Smith said something that's powerful. I'm gonna put it back on the screen. Know your role. Everybody ain't your ministry. You can't always support everybody in every way that they need it at that time. You got to know your place. And if you spot something and you get that inclination to help somebody, help them. But if you can't, you're going to be doing more damage than anything else. Right? So this is what we talked about. This first podcast back in a while. We're going to be back a lot more often in the dungeon. I appreciate y'all coming, showing up. Walters, my guy. Yes, Lord, you got to know your place. Yep. Mr. Walters is one of, I work with him. He's an amazing teacher. Miss Kane. I see there's a lot of y'all out here. Say it loud for the people in the back. Listen, you got to be in a place where you understand your role. And sometimes that's difficult to know when to shut your mouth and when to not shut your mouth, when to help somebody and how to help that person. Everybody can't be helped the way you want to help them. And you've got to understand how to deal with that. Let me get off my soapbox. But I appreciate y'all being on, coming to the dungeon. Please like, share, subscribe. Share this with people. Share this with everybody. Listen, you don't know who's dealing with grief. You don't know how they're dealing with it. Share this with as many people as you can. And we'll be back. Oh, I got something else in the chat. It's Wallace. Great topic to come back on, Bishop. That was hard, though. Listen, that was hard. That was hard. But we back. And we're going to be back a little more often now. But I appreciate y'all being on. We'll see y'all next time.